So I guess for anyone watching, this is going to be the first episode in a series of podcasts where I interview people doing various things. This is one person who did a study on, I guess, zoo visitors who would see scientific research or not see scientific research in a zoo, and she basically just tried to see if that affected how much knowledge they gained when they visited. So,
Yes.
is that an accurate summation? Did I miss anything?
That is pretty accurate. Yeah, so experiment one focused on what people learned from the visit when they either watched the research or didn't, and also their attitudes towards scientific research in zoos. And then experiment two recorded caregiver-child dyad conversation when they were either watching the research or not, and also gathered information from the children and the adults in the study.
Cool, cool. So I I'm kind of deciding between t asking general questions first and going specific. So
Okay.
I think I'll probably start general.
Okay, that
So
works.
I did my own thesis. I
Yes.
noticed that uh I had a lot of stuff I didn't really have time to do, but
Yeah.
would have been kind of cool if I could have gone into it. Like, is there anything like that that comes to
Um,
mind?
that I wish I could have done.
Yeah.
Um, well, yes. In particular, in experiment two, the sample of caregiver child dyads that we collected was very underpowered. I'm sorry, the cat keeps putting his tail in front of the
No,
lens.
it's fine.
Um, but it was very underpowered because we didn't have time to collect as many dyads as we wanted. Our experiment one sample was powered. We got enough adults, but we didn't have enough time to get enough families. And so those results are being taken with a grain of salt. And I wasn't able to do all of the analyses that I wanted to do with that sample because it was underpowered. And so if I had more time, I definitely would have wanted to collect just more dyads in general.
Yeah.
Um, And then there are certain aspects of their conversation that I wish I could have coded for and analyzed that previous studies have done that I didn't have time to do. Um, those would probably be the two main
Oh.
aspects that I wish I could have done.
So when you say underpowered, what does that mean?
Um, so in terms of doing a power analysis, it's not, we don't have enough, we didn't have enough people to find the effects, if that makes sense. Like,
Oh yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
yeah, so typically, like, you need a certain size sample to accurately see whether you got an effect or not.
Hmm.
And because our sample was so small, it's not really telling of that. And so the effects that we did see were a little bit skeptical of. And there are certain analyses that we just couldn't do because the coding software just wouldn't want to do it with that
Oh yeah.
low of a sample.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. I let's see. I got the impression that when I was reading this that you like talking about the baboons a lot because it seems like that
Yes.
was a yeah. Um I don't know, it seems like that was a part of it. Do you think you were trying to work that in? Like I like doing this
Um,
thing, so I want to do it more.
yes, definitely. Um, well, because I've been into animal research for a very long time. And so that was a very I want to know how people perceive it when they're at the zoo, partially because I'm really interested in it.
Right.
Um,
So
yes,
that's how you kind of came up with it then, like the idea.
partially, and also my advisor had already talked about this idea with her colleague, and they kind of came up with the idea, and they were like, we really need a grad student to take on a project like this. And so she kind of pitched it to me when I was coming up with ideas for my thesis, and it sounded really interesting to me. And so then I kind of helped formulate the questions we were going to ask and exactly how we were going to go about it.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. I
Mhm.
like, yeah. I guess you probably have picked up a lot of information about baboons in general, right? Like,
Yes.
doing the whole thing, like during grad studies, probably earlier than that. So, like, how
Mhm.
much, what do you think are like some general things about animals, about these animals specifically that like you find interesting that you learned in the meantime? Is there anything like you've passively picked up? Like in the meantime, like while
Mhm.
doing this stuff that you wouldn't read in a textbook, but like you see it.
Um, yes. Um, I guess like this happened during the study and also outside of conducting the study, just when the baboons are doing their research, in general. And I guess people are pretty familiar with the hierarchy that primates have.
Yeah,
Um, and so that really determines who gets to engage with the research because the research is also enrichment for the baboons, and so they enjoy doing it and it's voluntary, but they decide who gets to play it and when. And so the more dominant ones typically get to get first grabs.
oh, that
Um,
makes sense. Yeah,
yes. And so, but it's interesting because sometimes their hierarchy changes a little bit. And there's sometimes some moments where like two baboons are kind of at the same spot in their hierarchy. And so then it becomes more complicated for who gets to play the game. And so they'll both kind of go up at the same time. And I've seen them kind of like come up with an agreement where one of them plays for a little bit and the other one just kind of idles by and then they voluntarily switch and they just kind of do that for a while. They'll just switch back and forth.
yeah,
Um, and I really like when that happens because another thing that can happen in that situation is that they do just fight over it,
yeah.
and get aggressive. But in general, I think seeing the agreement that they had was very interesting, and I didn't know that that was something that could happen.
I feel like that would be a really interesting study on its own.
It would be.
Yeah, because you could basically see like, okay, if you see like dominance hierarchy conflicts,
Hmm.
how does this typically play out? Is there something that determines the outcome?
Yeah.
I feel like that would also be really interesting. Like if someone was interested in how game theory like manifests in
Mhm.
animal behavior, like that would be really interesting too.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
because I've been reading a bit about game theory recently, and
Mhm.
it seems like there's a lot of like math there that predicts how people or animals could behave in a lot of situations. Um,
Oh, interesting.
yeah, yeah, but I feel like that would actually give like a decent framework for like testing something like that. Um,
Definitely.
yeah, I don't know. I thought that was interesting. Um,
Yeah.
I was reading this. I was rereading it yesterday, and
Mhm.
one thing I like started kind of reading about was like baboon social structures and hierarchies because I was just curious
Oh,
about it.
really?
Yeah.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, yeah, but I had a lot of thoughts related to that. And one thing I was thinking was like, okay, first of all, I saw a few things come up, but like typically how big do you think their social structures are? Or like how big do you think their social groups are in the wild?
In the wild, they can really vary, and I think the largest troops can have up to 300 baboons in a group.
That's
So
quite a
they can
few.
get really big. Obviously, when they're under human care, like at the zoo, their troop size is only 10, and so it's much smaller. But yeah, in the wild, it can be up to like 300 baboons. They can get really, really big.
Yeah. Yeah, apparently, you ever heard of Dunbar's number?
No.
So apparently the size of the outer cortex can be used to predict the social group size.
Uh,
It's not like super reliable, like this is always what the group size is going to be, but like people have noticed that like in general the social group, like how big it can get is limited by like how big the brains are. And
oh, that's really interesting.
yeah, I personally think the reason I don't want to get into it here because it's too much of a tangent, but like I kind of think
Okay.
the reason is probably theory of mind.
Yeah.
Um anyway, I kind of wondered like, okay, is there anything like specifically that could like determine like how do you connect theory of mind to the social group, right? They notice there's a connection there, but like yeah, I'm curious about that. What do you think?
I don't know. Um, I don't, how about, can you start by explaining a little bit can you do like a mini tangent on what you were going to talk about? Because I feel like it might help steer me in towards
Oh
an answer.
yeah.
Hmm.
I don't know, I was kind of thinking like, okay, when there are different orders of like theory of mind. So like,
Yeah.
first order theory of mind is I'm thinking about what you're thinking. Second
Yeah.
order theory of mind is like I'm thinking about what you're thinking about what I'm thinking. And
Right.
third order is like I'm thinking about what you're thinking about what I'm thinking about what you're thinking. So like
Yes.
you can go higher and higher,
Right.
but like social animals apparently can use this to to sort of predict each other's behavior and like navigate social
Hmm.
situations. I was thinking like, you know, the order that you can go, like how high you can go there, is probably going to depend on like how sophisticated your thought process is. So it sort of makes sense in a way that like the cortex size would be connected to the social group size.
Hmm.
Because if the social group is too big, they can't track what each other is thinking.
Right. Okay. Well, yes, that does give me a good thought because I feel like probably when they're in the wild, there's probably an increased need to keep or be able to tell what others are thinking and about what they're thinking about what they're thinking,
Yeah,
because they're they're naturally foraging, they're trying to see clear of predators. I feel like um, with all of those obstacles, it's probably very valuable to be able to think what others are thinking and what those others are thinking about what they're thinking,
yeah,
um, for survival.
yeah,
And also, I think that um, not like you said, I don't think that that is the only determining factor of how big their troop size is. I think it's also just in the wild, there are a lot of obstacles where having more of them is better for survival.
yeah,
Um, and so I think maybe there's kind of like a relationship there where they need the bigger troop for their survival. And maybe that in turn means that they develop this ability for higher orders of theory of mind,
yeah,
if that makes sense. And then when they're in the zoo, for example, they may not need to be thinking that critically because there's not nearly as many of them and they don't need to consider these other factors for survival.
yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I should probably clarify something else too.
Yeah.
Apparently, humans are capable of like these higher orders, as far as we can tell.
Hmm.
Chimps maybe can go to second order theory of mind, but apparently not past that. So, that was something else. I don't want to give people the impression that like,
That
uh,
baboons do like third order theory of mind.
yeah, exactly. But I thought
Yeah.
like maybe that type of there was a limitation of that type that determined social group size. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah,
Just
that's really interesting. Yeah, I'm sure that there's some sort of like, yeah, like relationship between maybe like they have to form a bigger group for survival, and then that also like increases need for exercising theory of mind, probably more,
yeah.
um, in a way.
Or
That's
maybe there's a pressure for it. I don't know.
yeah,
Because like you're probably going to have an easier time navigating a hierarchy like that if you can model what the others are thinking, like in your own head.
definitely.
Yeah. Um, I don't know. I just thought that was interesting. I have more to say about it, but I don't want to like make the whole thing about that.
That's
Um,
really interesting.
yeah. Let's see. Oh, so what are some aspects of their social structure that you think are like relevant to how they interact there that like might be different from something else that you see?
Um,
I know I'm asking a lot of like questions where you're like, I'm putting you on the spot, but
no, that's okay. I like the questions.
yeah.
Uh, do you mean like in this zoo specifically,
Um,
right? Like,
well, I mean, from what you've seen,
yeah,
because I mean, I could probably like Google it, read about like how their social structure works, and see
yeah.
that like, um, they're more or less aggressive or hierarchical, or they're more of a tournament species or something. But like, is there anything like you've noticed that's a little bit more specific that like is a little bit different from what you might see somewhere else?
Um, yes. Well, I think having the research there, um, causes certain interactions that you might not see otherwise. And so I think that having the touch screen there and them engaging this research is a very unique situation. Well, I think other zoos they do implement these devices. It's still not super common, and you don't see it at many zoos.
Yeah,
And so I think that kind of like what I said before about depending on where they are in the hierarchy, it can affect their interactions for who gets to play the game and when. Um, and so I notice a lot of aggression, especially when there are two males that are maybe at a similar spot in their hierarchy and they're both interested in the game, and they'll break out in a big fight. Or I've also seen there are some really submissive baboons in the troop that really enjoy playing the game, but they don't usually get the opportunity when the more dominant baboons are playing. And so they'll typically kind of try to sneak in and start playing while the other ones are occupied or if they're inside. But you can
yeah,
tell that they're submissive by the way that they play because the whole time they're constantly like checking their surroundings. And they're very paranoid looking around because as soon as someone more dominant than them shows up, like they want to leave as like they want to get away from there because they don't want to end up in a situation where they make that baboon upset and they get hurt. Um, and
yeah, that
so,
makes sense.
yeah, I feel like that's not something that you see very often is baboons kind of um, behaving in a way that shows that they're kind of in a like fighting over this opportunity to engage with a cognitive activity. Um, I think that's very unique to this setup that you don't probably see at a lot of other zoos and obviously not in the wild.
Yeah, yeah. I guess that kind of like the way you're describing it, where the dominant males like get to do what they want, the less dominant males are kind of like sneaking around. That reminds
Mhm.
me of like what I imagine like high school in the 70s and 80s was probably like based on like movies I'm seeing. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Um, yeah, it's kind of what you would expect a little bit. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, and like the hierarchy is also it's very interesting because the males status on the hierarchy and the female status on the hierarchy, they're both determined in very different ways. Um, and so like the males are structured based on really like their appearance, like how big their teeth are and how much testosterone they have and how fluffy and how much fur they have and stuff. But the females is completely determined based on how much family they have in the troop.
Hmm.
Um, and
Oh, so
so, yeah,
females are their social status is primarily determined by social connections with the others, and the male's social status is mostly determined based on like traits that they have that might make them more physically dominant.
exactly. Mhm.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Huh.
Yes. Yeah. Um,
It's kind of cool. I guess I could start to ask some more specific questions now. So
okay.
um I noticed that there were a few different things in the study that you were kind of like measuring. I guess
hmm
one of those things would have been like the type of discussion that people are having about it, like the kinds of statements parents make when talking to
hmm
children.
Yes.
So there's that. That seems like um, it seems like a slightly different measurement than the kind of measurement you would be performing if you were asking knowledge questions. So, like, I
Yeah.
guess, were there two different intentions there, or were these like two different ways of measuring something that seemed the same to you? Like two different,
hmm
yeah, sorry.
Oh, that's okay. No, they were not really connected to each other. And so we actually thought about we're going to be turning this into two different publications. And we thought about actually combining all of the questionnaires from experiment one and experiment two into one paper and then making the conversations its own separate paper. And so, yeah, those measures were completely different, and we were measuring kind of two pretty different things. And so the knowledge questions, we did not do anything to connect those to the conversations. Um, yeah.
Mhm. Oh,
Yeah, so the we still we were interested in what the children were learning from the experience, and it was also going to be very interesting to get that from the caregivers so we could add that to our adult sample of questionnaires. But previous research had recorded caregiver-child conversation when in the presence of animals at the zoo, and so we wanted to um, try to do that with our study, but add in the component of the research happening.
right, yeah. So I guess the knowledge questions, like I guess that I saw some knowledge questions that were kind of like, okay, how large is the largest baboon troop in nature?
Yeah.
Um, but I guess there were other questions like, how can pimento be identified? And I guess the answer to
Yeah.
that one was like her tongue sticks out. So I
Yeah.
guess like the former type of question, it's probably not the kind of question you would be more likely to get right if you saw scientific research, right? But my guess is like if you saw scientific research being conducted in the zoo, you'd be more likely to pay attention to the baboons. So you might actually pay attention to something like, her tongue sticking out.
Yeah. Um, so the two groups, the group that saw the research happening got questions about the research, and then those that saw them while the research was off got questions about kind of those more like biological aspects, like the troop size and stuff. And so we kind of wanted to make sure that the participants were getting questioned on whatever they saw. And so those questions were different for the two groups. And they got different presentations as well, based on what the baboons were doing in front of them. And so, like, while giving everyone a fair shot to learn about what they were seeing, we wanted to see if, when they learned about scientific research, did they reflect that learning better? Um,
Hmm.
and also, we made sure that half of the quiz questions were taken from content on the signs around the exhibit, and half of them were taken from what they learned from the presentation. And so the sign questions were the same for both groups because everyone was looking at the same signs, but the questions taken from the presentation were different because they got different presentations, whether the research was on or off.
Right.
Um, and so, like, for example, that question about pimento, like how you can identify her, that was a question taken from one of the signs. Um, because there's a sign that like says that information, it has a picture of her. And so we were seeing what people learned from that. Because we also wanted to compare that to how they learn from interacting with a scientist.
Right. Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah. Have you heard of those studies that were done with chimpanzees that measured working memory? That apparently, so there were some in Japan that were done apparently that like they measured chimp working memory and like visual working memory specifically,
Yeah.
and they found that like apparently chimpanzees they're way stronger than humans at
Mhm.
visual working memory
Yes.
specifically. Yeah.
I
I
think I read a study like that. It was something with remembering a set of numbers, I
yeah.
want to say, and the chimpanzees outperformed the humans.
Yeah. I kind of wonder why that is. What do you think? I'm just curious.
Um, well, I obviously I haven't done any work with chimpanzees before, and I think that that's probably on another level of what I've done with baboons because those are apes versus monkeys. But I still think I want to say that because of as a society as humans, everything has become so accessible and sort of easy for us that our working memory isn't as important, I want to say. And so on a day-to-day basis, I feel like working memory isn't something that is essential as often as it may be for chimpanzees,
Yeah.
in their day-to-day life. I think, I don't know if technology plays a role at all in it, but I just think that possibly the way human society has been set up makes it so that our working memory is not as needed as it might be for chimpanzees.
Yeah. I mean, I saw an interview with the guy that I guess was responsible for that research, and he said that thought it was probably a trade-off between language and like other cognitive abilities. So I guess he would have said like when we gain language, we kind of lost a little bit of capacity in some other areas like that.
That's a really good thought too. Um, and that's interesting because um, well, my close friend does a lot of research in language and that development throughout primates and kind of how that led to us developing it in humans. Um, but yeah, I think that's a really interesting thought. And I think that we can also say that for us, language has become a really essential part of everyday life, whereas it's not for chimpanzees. And so I think that based on what we need in our day-to-day lives and how that is so different is kind of what's determining where our strengths and weaknesses are.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I also read a book about Neanderthals recently,
Oh,
or
really?
somewhat recent. They apparently found so there's this gene called FOXP2 that like it's really closely related to language, and they found that like apparently Neanderthals have like a version of it that's kind of similar to ours,
Yeah.
but like not totally similar. So they would have been. They think that they Neanderthals would have been almost as capable as Homo sapiens at language. Not
Oh,
quite.
really?
Yeah, they think they think that they think that they're not quite to the level of Homo sapiens, and the reason is because there was some genetic mixing between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens like tens of thousands of years ago, and apparently the idea would have been that like if that version of that gene was advantageous, you would have seen it like spread through Homo sapiens populations, and we didn't see
Right,
that.
right.
So we actually saw it like basically disappear. So they think there
Interesting.
was probably a selective pressure against that. But apparently there were a couple other language related genes that humans have that are different than like other animals like chimps and baboons.
Mhm.
And apparently there's a small number of genes that like control language. And I guess there would probably be more in theory, but I guess what
Right.
I'm getting at is it seems like it seems like if something like that was really what was really the adaptation that we were getting in the meantime. If that went away, you would expect to see working memory increase, right? Or, I mean, like if you had a version of the gene that, let's say, was defective and inhibited language, you would expect to see something like an improvement in working memory, but you don't
Yes.
see that. You actually
Right.
see the opposite when someone has like a mutation in that gene that affects their language ability, their other abilities are weakened too.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So
So then I
like,
guess
oh, sorry.
that, sorry, I was gonna say, well, I guess like that thought that chimpanzees not having language and therefore possibly having working memory, I guess that doesn't really make sense.
Yeah. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe there are other adaptations that are also relevant. Like, the working memory would have diminished and then, maybe eventually we would have gotten language, or maybe the other way around. Maybe we got language and then apparently, I don't know, maybe limitations in working memory had trade-offs that made us better at language. I don't know.
Yeah, that's very possible. And I mean, there probably still could be a selective pressure for it, but I don't know, perhaps when something goes wrong and someone loses that gene to exercise language, because there's selective pressure for them to have that language, that doesn't necessarily mean that these other abilities that they don't necessarily need to have are going to get better.
Yeah.
That made any sense?
Yeah, yeah. Huh.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess my opinion is there's probably something a little bit more complicated at play than just like being better at language means you're worse at working memory or something, but I don't
yeah,
know.
definitely. Yeah, definitely something more complex than that. That would be a simple way for it to work.
Yeah. I mean, if only things were that simple, then, you know,
Yeah,
I guess scientists would be out of a job then if it were that easy.
I know. I was gonna say, then like, what are we gonna talk about?
Yeah, exactly. I was, I don't know, I was gonna think that. Anyway, I guess Zoom is giving me like 40 minutes and it says I have a few minutes left.
Okay.
So, uh, I don't know. I guess kind of debating whether I should like try to end it early or like restart the thing. Huh.
It's up to
Oh,
you.
actually, you know what? I'll just continue the conversation because I, I had a bunch of questions like listed out, and I'm like, well, I kind of wonder if a conversation would be better, like a conversational kind of style. Yeah. Um, let's see. So do you think how much carryover do you think there is like in our social structures between like baboons and other species? Because like have you ever seen there's a Netflix documentary
Mhm.
called Chimp Empire,
Mhm.
and they basically just go through the story of chimpanzees, and they're kind of like dominance battles and stuff, but it like the way the whole story plays out or unfolds, it seems a little bit like kind of like a medieval drama or something, like a
Mhm.
drama about like some medieval king or something like
Okay.
that. Yeah. If you watch it, you'll know exactly what I mean. But what I'm
Mhm.
saying is, you watch something like that and the behaviors on the surface aren't exactly the same, but if you think about it, there's actually a lot of overlap between like what they're doing and what we're doing. And
Yeah.
this kind of seems like a similar thought to what I said earlier, but I kind of wonder, like, it seems like people look at a lot of a lot of the stuff we see in humans. We look at like people um people fighting over status and money and things like that. And we assume that a lot of that stuff is happening that way because modern society is the way it is. But it seems
Yeah.
like we see analogs like that when we look at other species that are distantly related to us.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know, it just seems like a lot of like these behaviors are a lot more ingrained than we usually assume, right?
Yeah, I definitely think so. Um, I think it's interesting because obviously it's not seen across all species, and species sort of develop their system based on their selective pressures. And so, like some species, they really just travel in solitude and live that way, and some of them they do develop groups like that because it's more advantageous. Um,
Yeah,
but yeah, and then we do see social structure in many species, not in all of them, but in a lot of them. And I think that we see them especially in species that are more closely related to us.
yeah,
And so that system has carried over from more distant species to more closely related species. And I think it definitely carries over quite a bit into ours as well.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. I mean,
and
like it, oh,
yeah,
sorry. It seems
that's
like
okay.
placental mammals, in general, like it seems like they tend to show a lot of similarities. Like if you've interacted with a dog, you'll know that like a dog does have like social instincts. Like it has an idea of
Yeah,
what its family is and what counts as family and what counts as like something outside of that or strangers. Um, they
definitely.
they they have an idea of like what's going on there, who's dominant, who's not. Like
Hmm.
um, it's not like it's not as overlapping as like okay, I just started recording again. Okay, yeah, I guess we got cut off. Okay, so we were talking about dogs and
Yeah.
social structures and stuff like that. Um oh yeah, so I guess what I was kind of getting at is we see overlap with placental mammals specifically. And we see a lot more overlap with like other primates. But I don't know, I think it's I forgot what my point was. I think it
You're
was yeah. I think it
yeah,
was like oh sorry.
sorry, I was gonna
Zoom
say
always like yeah, Zoom always works like that where like you start talking and the other person's talking. I don't know. Yeah.
yes, it does. I know. Well, I remember you talking about the dogs and them recognizing like who's family, who are strangers, who's dominant, who's not.
Oh yeah. I don't know. I think the point I was getting at is a lot of these things are a lot more deeply rooted than we realize. You know, a lot of this stuff is not because of like modern society or because like culture brainwashes us into thinking this way. It's just because this is how people naturally are. Doesn't mean it's
Right.
like doesn't mean that we have to be like that. We have to have like bullies in high school and stuff. But I think it is probably
Mhm.
important to realize like where that comes from and
Definitely.
that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I'm sure that modern society does play its role, but it definitely is not just that. There's a lot that's ingrained or hardwired into us.
Yeah,
Um, and I think that that evidence is pretty clear from it being present in animal species that came before us.
yeah, that's true. You know, actually, you know, I think it's interesting because it seems like I was thinking about this the other day. When you think about like the history of the, let's say the history of multicellular life, it's like it's a few 100 million years old, maybe a little over a billion, depending on what you're looking for. But
Hmm.
like animals and plants are maybe a few 100,000 or 100 million years old.
Hmm.
Placental mammals are like 100 million years old. Um, maybe a little less,
Hmm.
right? Primates are like 25, or not primates, but great apes are like 25 million years old, right?
Hmm.
Humans are like 300,000 years old, right?
Hmm.
Every iterative step you get, like it's just drastically smaller. Like
Right.
300,000 years compared to like 25 million. That's insane, right?
Yeah.
That's like a tiny, tiny sliver. And
Yeah.
then when you think about modern, well, not modern society, but when you think about like when farming came around towards the end of the Ice Age,
Hmm.
it's like that's like 12,000 years ago, right? That's a
Yeah.
tiny sliver of human history,
Right.
right? And then that 12,000 years, that's way longer than modern society, right?
Hmm.
So like efficient bureaucracies have maybe been around for a couple thousand years.
Right.
Modern society, maybe a few hundred years,
Yeah.
like depending on how you define it. So like
Hmm.
when you think about it that way, like it makes sense why like the 25 million years probably has a bigger impact on how we are and the way we behave than
Definitely.
the 200 years that we've been like doing philosophy and thinking about like these idealistic kind of ideas about how humans are and the
Hmm.
rights of man and that kind of thing, you know?
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree. And like, not to say that those few hundred, yeah, few
Yeah.
hundred years have been, um, they've definitely had their impact. I mean, it's not like they haven't affected the way that we are, but I think that all the time leading up to that is what formed the foundation for it. And so
Yeah.
definitely is what had the most impact.
Yeah, yeah. Actually one other thought that I've had is like, okay, the Ice Age, it was I guess over the course of like the 300,000 years of human history, like we've been living during an ice age, and there have been minima and maxima, right?
Hmm.
Over the course of that period, right? The last glacial maximum ended like 12,000 years ago.
Hmm.
There were periods in that 300,000 years where there were glacial minima, right?
Hmm.
So, like, there would have been warmer periods, like
Hmm.
12,000 years or 10,000 years or something long,
Yeah,
where um, things would have warmed up just like they did recently, right?
right.
And they didn't have I mean, as far as we can tell, they didn't have modern society during those periods.
Yeah, right,
I mean, I wonder what changed.
right.
And
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about it that way, like it's like, okay, during this whole period, there are periods of warming and cooling and this and that. And over that whole period, people are having entire lives. They're trying to avoid freezing in the cold. They're figuring
Mhm.
out how they're going to hunt their next meal. I mean, like there's all this stuff going on.
Yeah,
And that's most of human history, right?
right,
The vast, vast majority.
right.
It just seems wild, like when you think about it that way.
It is
And
pretty wild. Yeah, to think that like a majority of humans existing has been very much not the way it is.
today, yeah, and then we look at how things are today and we go like, oh, it's modern society. We have bullies treating people badly because modern society tells them it's okay or
Mhm.
something like that. I don't know if that's an ex exact quote from anything, but you know what I
Right.
mean.
No, I know what you mean. Yeah, people definitely credit it way too much for it being around for such a short period of time.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I will say I think modern society does do some stuff, like it is responsible for some stuff. So like for example, the reason a lot of people have issues with obesity seems to be because of the diets we live on nowadays,
mhm.
because it's different than how we lived back then. So
Right,
I mean there's stuff like that, but like a lot of the social stuff, it seems like it's so deeply ingrained because that's just not how things were for the vast, vast, vast majority of like our ancestors' existence.
right. Yeah. I mean I do. And like what you were saying about obesity, I think that there are a lot of changes that happen with modern society that contribute to that as well. Like the way that the economy has played its role and certain groups of people not having resources that other people have and not being able to eat healthfully and not having access to the same foods that others do.
Yeah.
Um, and I think also like dependence on transportation has played such a role in that. And, but probably, I think that modern society has created issues like that. And that's not, it doesn't just cause issues in obesity, but other factors as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think, I still think that overall social status is something that has been going on for a very, very long time, and it was happening before these things were implemented. Um,
Yeah.
and so like yeah, I think like modern society like it definitely impacted things, and I know that the advancement of technology has impacted a lot too. But I think that in general, probably those things would not be having their effect if years and years before that there wasn't like a foundation for that to have an effect, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, and
Yeah,
so,
yeah. I listened to a podcast actually about I think it was what was his name? I forgot his name, but I think it was his last name was Reich.
mm,
He said that he did some genetic studies
mm,
where I think they found that like genes that were associated with obesity or diabetes would have like had a negative selective pressure on them over the past like 10,000 years. And
yeah,
that's something they've seen apparently consistently. Makes me think like, okay, that's probably, I mean, it seems like that would basically indicate that like the obesity thing is because of the diets we're living on in societies where they rely on farming.
yeah.
So it seems like something like that. It's recent, but it's like last 10,000 years recent. And then I guess there
Mhm.
are probably other things like the internet that causes problems that we're probably yet to see the full extent of, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
So anyway, baboons. No, I'm kidding.
yeah,
Um,
sorry. I'm thinking you're saying a lot of very thoughtful things.
yeah.
Yes. I have to go in like a few minutes, but I can answer like we can
Mhm.
maybe talk for like a couple more minutes about baboons.
All right. What was the goal? Like, what's the ultimate like we should do this type of statement that you wanted to end up with, or that you did, I guess, end up with?
I'm from the thesis.
Yeah.
So a few main things. Um, One of the implications, there are a few implications for zoos that we found. And so these are less so implications for research, and it can also be really helpful for zoos and business in from a business perspective. But we found that visitors they are they show signs of significantly higher engagement when they have an interactive component at the exhibit. And so people that didn't have the chance to interact with the scientist and just read the signs, they stayed for a significantly shorter period of time at the exhibit than people who did get the chance to interact with someone. And so zoos that want to engage their visitors more, I think it's pretty evident that the signs are not super effective in that. And previous research has also shown that a low percentage of people choose to interact with the signs. And so adding more interactive components can be really helpful, and it doesn't necessarily need to be a person, sorry. It does not necessarily need to be a live person. That's not always feasible for zoos, but it can also be like a game or a video recording, just something that is a little bit more interactive for visitors. Um,
Yeah.
and we also saw that everybody performed significantly better on their quiz questions that were taken from the scientist interaction, and everybody performed significantly more poorly on content questions taken from the signs. And so people also actually reflect higher learning from interacting with someone or having an interactive component. And so zoos should take that into account as well. Um, and also, a lot of zoos, they have their animals doing scientific research, but it's oftentimes done behind the scenes. It's done privately because they don't want to it's not always feasible to have visitors see that. But if they are able to, it is something they could consider because the visitors that were able to watch this scientific research reported significantly higher perceived learning than those who saw the baboons when the research was off. And that means that they walked away feeling like they learned more, even though they
Yeah.
actually didn't. They didn't actually perform better on the quiz questions, but they felt like they learned more. And that's likely because they learned something new. Learning about
Yeah.
research is probably pretty unique. But so I think that if zoos want their visitors to leave feeling like, wow, I really learned a lot from that, and that education was really successful from their visit, I think they should consider making research projects more public if they're able to. Um,
Yeah,
so
because it's not just people like hidden away somewhere doing some stuff that you don't understand. You actually get to see it.
exactly. Yeah. And then I think um, what we can take away for scientific research is that um, I think that there's a lot of skepticism, especially right now, surrounding science and surrounding research. And I think, particularly with animal research, people sometimes don't have this full understanding of it and they only think of it as being an invasive or harmful situation. Um, but animal research can also be very enriching and voluntary for animals, if you look at it from a psychological perspective. And so I think being able to showcase that and seeing how interested visitors were in it and how much they felt like they learned from that experience is really exciting for scientific research, and for animal research in particular, because it just increases awareness and increases education about what scientific research can look like and how animals can play a role in that in addition to humans.
Yeah. All right. That makes sense. I guess we're past 1:30 and you said you had to go at around then. But I feel like we could keep the conversation going if we wanted to.
Yeah, definitely.
So, that would be cool. I don't know.
Yeah.
So yeah. I don't know if there's like something I could say to like end this off, like, you know, scientific research is good. We need to
Mhm.
show people more of it. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, what you just said is the bulk of
Yeah.
we took away from this study. Um, and there's probably not time, but there are a bunch of avenues you could go from this study for future research that we thought of. Um,
Oh yeah, yeah. When I was doing my thesis, I had the same thing. Like I could probably take this in a lot of different directions, but I didn't really have the
definitely.
time,
Right.
Yeah. It always takes time to
Yeah,
write it up and like do the research actually and stuff.
exactly.
Yeah.
I know
And
thesis is hard that way.
yeah. It wasn't actually I take that back. It depends. It was kind of hard towards the deadline for me, but like for the most part, it was just like kind of interesting and kind of boring. I
Mhm.
don't know.
Yeah.
An interesting mix of the two. Yeah. Um.
Yeah, I felt that way too. Like towards the end of my thesis, I really just wanted it to be off my plate. Um,
Oh yeah. I
and be
totally
done with
felt the
it.
same.
Yeah,
Especially like really towards the end. I was like, oh my God, I just want to be done. Like I
I
don't
know.
even. Yeah. Um.
Booming over me.
Yeah. The cat is very entertaining.
I know. He's like, just cannot stop walking in front of the camera.
Maybe he likes your computer, or
He
maybe
does
he's just.
in a mood. He's also um biting me and
Mm.
wants to play.
Oh yeah, she's trying to claim dominance over you, I guess. She's getting
Yes.
the alpha position.
Yes. That's okay. I'm okay with that.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's fair. All right, all right. Well, I hope you have a good day.
Thank you. You too.
I wouldn't mind talking again, but this seems like a good place to end off. Yeah,
Okay, yeah. Just let me know if you want to talk more about it.
cool. Yeah, sounds good.
Yes.